My name is Harper, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in a tiny studio apartment, staring at my phone as it buzzes with 17 missed calls from my family. 24 hours ago, I walked out of my parents' mansion with nothing but a backpack on my shoulders. My mother's final words still echo in my mind like a curse. "You are no longer our daughter." My sister Sloane's mocking laugh still rings in my ears, sharp and cruel. But now, their desperate messages flood in, one after another, each more frantic than the last. Something has gone terribly wrong for them, and apparently, I'm the only one who can fix it. I stare at the screen, my finger hovering over the answer button, wondering if I should even respond. Let me tell you how I went from family disgrace to their only hope in one single day. Before we dive into this wild story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you're ready to hear how everything flipped in just 24 hours, go ahead and smash that like button and hit subscribe because you won't believe what happens next. Trust me, this story takes turns you won't see coming. Now, let's get into it. I grew up in what everyone called the perfect American dream. The Ashford family of Connecticut was everything people aspired to be, at least on the surface. My father, Richard, was a successful investment banker, with a corner office in Manhattan, and a reputation that opened every door in the financial world. My mother, Vivian, was the kind of socialite who organized charity galas, sat on museum boards, and never left the house without perfect makeup and designer clothes. Our estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured lawns, complete with a pool, tennis courts, and a guest house that was bigger than most people's actual homes. We had memberships at the most exclusive country clubs, summer homes in the Hamptons, and a family name that commanded respect in every room we entered. My sister Sloane was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she could talk, she understood exactly how to play the game. She was the golden child, the one who said the right things, wore the right clothes, dated the right boys from the right families. She knew how to make our parents beam with pride, how to charm their friends, how to be the perfect reflection of everything they valued. I, on the other hand, was always the complicated one, the daughter who asked too many questions and cared about the wrong things. I graduated from Yale with honors in business administration, exactly as expected. But even that achievement felt hollow, because it wasn't really what I wanted. It was what they wanted, what the Ashford legacy demanded. Growing up in that house meant living with strict expectations that pressed down on you like a physical weight. Every dinner conversation was a performance. Every social event a test of whether you could uphold the family reputation. My parents raised us to believe that appearances were everything, that the opinions of our social circle mattered more than personal happiness, that success was measured in dollar signs and social connections, rather than fulfillment or purpose. I tried to conform for years, desperately attempting to be the daughter they wanted. I worked at my father's investment firm after graduation, attended the endless galas and fundraisers, smiled politely at wealthy men twice my age who asked invasive questions about my plans to settle down and start a family. But I had a secret passion that grew stronger every year despite my attempts to suppress it. I cared deeply about environmental advocacy and sustainable living, about making a real difference in the world, rather than just accumulating wealth and status. The tension had been building for years, simmering beneath the surface of our perfectly staged family dinners. I would try to bring up climate change or corporate responsibility, and my mother would change the subject with a tight smile. Vivian's favorite weapon was comparison, and she wielded it constantly. "Why can't you be more like Sloane?" She'd say at least once a week. "She understands what matters. She knows how to make us proud." The implication was always clear. I was the disappointment, the daughter who failed to appreciate the privilege she'd been given. Sloane played her role perfectly, always positioning herself as the victim of my supposedly radical ideas and embarrassing interests. She had a gift for manipulation that I didn't fully understand until much later. She would act sympathetic to my face, pretending to be the one person who understood my struggles, and then she'd run straight to our parents with exaggerated stories about my attitude and ingratitude. My father, Richard, was perhaps the cruelest in his indifference. He was a man who only cared about business connections and social status, who measured his daughter's worth by how they could advance his position in the world. He looked at me the way you'd look at a disappointing investment, something that hadn't generated the expected returns. I tried to make it work for so long, suppressing who I really was to fit into their world. I attended charity events where wealthy people congratulated themselves for donating a tiny fraction of their wealth, while changing nothing about the systems that created poverty in the first place. I wore uncomfortable designer dresses and smiled through conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes while dying inside. Every day felt like I was suffocating, living a lie, performing a role in a play I never auditioned for. But I kept trying because they were my family, and some deep part of me still believed that if I just worked hard enough, did well enough, they might eventually see me as worthy of their love. 6 months before everything exploded, I made a terrible mistake. During a board meeting at my father's firm, I suggested that we should consider investing in renewable energy companies and sustainable technologies. I had researched it thoroughly, prepared a whole presentation about the long-term profitability and positive environmental impact. I genuinely thought he might listen, that maybe I could bridge the gap between their world and my values. Instead, Richard laughed in my face in front of 15 senior executives and major investors. He actually laughed, this cold, dismissive sound that made my cheeks burn with humiliation. "Harper thinks we should save the trees," he announced to the room, and everyone joined in his laughter. "That's very sweet, honey, but let's leave business to the adults." The humiliation didn't end there. Sloane somehow found out about the meeting, and within days, everyone in our social circle knew the story. She told it at brunches and cocktail parties, painting me as this naive, foolish girl who didn't understand how the real world worked. I became a joke, the Ashford daughter who cared more about polar bears than profit margins. People would smile patronizingly when they saw me, as if I were a child going through a phase. The breaking point was building with every passing day, but I kept trying to please them, kept hoping that somehow, some way, they would see me as more than just a disappointment. 3 months before I finally walked out, my parents called me into my father's study for what they said was an important family discussion. The room smelled like leather and expensive cigars, filled with dark wood furniture and shelves lined with books my father had never read but kept for appearance. My mother sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her spine perfectly straight, while Richard stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back like a general preparing to issue orders. Sloane was there too, looking unusually interested in whatever was about to happen. My father turned to me with what he probably thought was a warm smile, and announced that they had arranged for me to meet someone very special. His name was Bradford Wellington III, from one of the oldest and wealthiest families in New England, and apparently, he was very interested in getting to know me better. I felt my stomach drop even before they finished explaining. Bradford was everything I despised. The embodiment of entitled wealth and arrogant privilege. I had met him briefly at a gala the previous year, and had spent the entire conversation talking about his yacht and his collection of vintage cars while looking down my dress. The way my parents talked about him made it clear this wasn't just a casual introduction. My mother leaned forward, her eyes bright with an excitement I rarely saw directed at me. "This is your chance to secure your future and ours, Harper," she said, and something in her tone made alarm bells ring in my head. That's when my father revealed the truth that changed everything. His firm was in serious financial trouble, bleeding money from bad investments and legal fees I didn't fully understand. They needed Bradford's family connections, needed access to their network and capital to save the business from collapse. I was the bargaining chip in a merger negotiation, a pretty package they could offer to seal the deal. When I refused initially, the pressure intensified immediately. Richard's face turned hard, and Vivian's voice took on that sharp edge that meant she was truly angry. They painted my refusal as selfish and ungrateful, as if I owed them my entire future in exchange for the childhood they'd provided. "After everything we've given you," my father said coldly, "this is how you repay us? We've raised you in luxury, given you the best education, opened every door for you, and you won't do this one simple thing for your family." Sloane's manipulation during this time was masterful, and I didn't see it coming until it was too late. She would find me alone and act like the understanding sister, listening sympathetically as I expressed my doubts and fears about being pushed into this arrangement. She'd hug me and say things like, "I know it's hard, but maybe give Bradford a chance. Sometimes love grows over time." I trusted her in those moments, believed she actually cared about my well-being. What I didn't know was that she was recording our private conversations on her phone, carefully editing the recordings to make me sound like a spoiled, ungrateful monster. One night at dinner, Sloane played an edited version of our conversation for our parents. In her version, it sounded like I called them social climbers, said I was embarrassed by their desperation, and mocked them for needing Bradford's family money. My father exploded with a rage I'd rarely seen. He slammed his fist on the dining table so hard the crystal glasses rattled, his face turning red as he shouted about my ingratitude and selfishness. My mother sat there with tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, looking at me like I'd physically struck her. "I'm so disappointed," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We've sacrificed so much for you, given up so much, and this is what you really think of us." I tried desperately to explain that the recording was taken out of context, that I hadn't meant those things the way they sounded, but they wouldn't listen. Sloane sat across from me, her eyes wide with false concern, playing the role of the worried sister perfectly. "I'm just worried about you, Harper," she said sweetly. "You seem so angry lately. Maybe you should talk to someone." The punishment was swift and calculated. They announced that I would be attending a weekend getaway with Bradford's family at their estate in the Berkshires, and my presence was not optional. The weekend was absolute torture from the moment I arrived. Bradford treated me like property he was considering purchasing, discussing my education and appearance with his parents, as if I weren't sitting right there. He made inappropriate comments disguised as compliments, his hand lingering too long on my lower back when we walked, his eyes constantly assessing me in a way that made my skin crawl. On the second night, he cornered me alone on the terrace after dinner. The sun had set, and the garden lights cast long shadows that made everything feel sinister. He stood too close, backing me against the stone railing, and whispered with a cold smile, "You'll learn to be grateful eventually. Your family needs us far more than we need you, so I suggest you start adjusting your attitude." I returned home shaken and feeling more trapped than ever before. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom surrounded by all the trappings of wealth and privilege, I realized with horrible clarity that my family would sacrifice my happiness without a second thought. They didn't see me as a person with my own dreams and autonomy. They saw me as an asset to be leveraged, a tool to secure their financial future and social standing. I started secretly researching ways to escape, looking at apartments I could never afford, and jobs that would never pay enough to support the lifestyle I'd been raised in. But I had no money of my own. Not really. Everything was controlled by the family, every credit card tied to accounts my father monitored, every asset in their name. I felt like a bird in a gilded cage, desperately wanting to fly but having no idea how to even open the door. The weekend at Bradford's estate became my moment of absolute clarity, the point where I knew with certainty that I could not live this life anymore. Something fundamental shifted inside me that weekend, and I stopped trying to convince myself that things might get better if I just tried harder to please them. I started planning my escape in secret, moving carefully and quietly like someone defusing a bomb. I reached out to my college friend Iris, someone I'd lost touch with over the years because she didn't fit into my family's social world. Iris worked at a non-profit environmental organization in the city, doing exactly the kind of work I'd always dreamed about. When I called her out of the blue and tried to explain my situation without giving away too much, she understood immediately. "I have a junior position opening up next month," she said without hesitation. "The pay is terrible, but if you're serious about getting out, the job is yours." Over the next 2 months, I became a different person, living a double life that required constant vigilance. I started secretly saving money in whatever ways I could, which was harder than it sounds when you've never had to think about money before. I went through my closet and found designer dresses I'd worn once to galas I didn't want to attend, handbags that cost more than some people made in a month, shoes that had never been worn. I created fake social media accounts and started selling these items online, meeting buyers in coffee shops far from my usual neighborhoods, always looking over my shoulder to make sure no one recognized me. When my mother asked where certain items had gone, I claimed I'd donated them to charity auctions, which she approved of because it fit the image of the generous, charitable Ashford family. The second major attack came when Vivian discovered that a family heirloom necklace, a diamond piece worth over $50,000, was missing from my jewelry box. I had sold it to a private collector, gotten cash that I'd hidden in a book in my room, but now I had to face the consequences. My mother went absolutely ballistic, her composure cracking in a way I'd rarely seen. She stood in my bedroom, shaking with rage, her voice rising to a shriek as she accused me of being careless and ungrateful. "That necklace belonged to your grandmother," she yelled, her face flushed. "It was supposed to be passed down through generations, and you lost it? How could you be so irresponsible?" I lied and said I must have lost it at a recent gala, that I was devastated, and had been too afraid to tell her. The punishment was immediate and severe. From that day forward, they monitored my bank accounts even more closely, checking every transaction, questioning every expense. Sloane volunteered to help me get organized, which really meant she was spying on me for our parents. She'd show up at my room unannounced, going through my things under the guise of helping me declutter, asking casual questions about where I'd been and who I'd seen. I had to become even more careful, even more secretive. I opened a new bank account at a small branch across town, using my friend's address so the statements wouldn't come to the house. Every dollar I managed to save felt like a small victory in a war I was fighting alone. It wasn't much, maybe $1,200 total after 2 months of selling everything I could, and skipping meals to pocket the cash my parents gave me for lunches and coffee. During this time, I met my second real ally quite by accident. His name was Griffin, and he worked with Iris at the nonprofit. I'd gone to meet Iris for coffee to discuss the job details, and Griffin happened to be there, this genuine, kind person who treated me like a normal human being instead of an Ashford. We started talking about environmental policy, and I realized I was having the first real conversation I'd had in months, maybe years. Griffin didn't know about my wealthy background, because I didn't tell him, and I loved the freedom of that anonymity. He saw me as just Harper, not the disappointing Ashford daughter, not the girl who was supposed to marry into the Wellington family. We met for coffee a few more times, and he offered me practical advice about living on a tight budget, finding affordable apartments, navigating the city without a car. He made me believe that escape was actually possible, that I could survive outside the bubble I'd been raised in. Meanwhile, the pressure at home about Bradford intensified with each passing week. The engagement party had been scheduled, invitations printed, venues booked. My parents talked about it constantly, planning every detail without asking my input, as if my consent was irrelevant to the entire proceeding. Then came the third attack, disguised as a generous gift. My father surprised me with a brand new luxury car, a sleek vehicle that probably cost more than most people's houses. At first, I thought maybe he was trying to rebuild our relationship, showing affection in the only way he knew how. Then Sloane casually mentioned over breakfast one morning, her eyes gleaming with malicious amusement, "Dad's so protective of you. He even had a GPS tracker installed in your new car so he always knows where you are. Isn't that sweet?" The realization hit me like ice water. They were tracking my every movement, monitoring where I went and how long I stayed there. I felt the walls closing in, the surveillance tightening around me like a noose. That night, I made my final decision. I had maybe $1,500 saved, which wasn't enough to survive for long, but I couldn't wait anymore. The engagement party was in 2 weeks, and I knew that if I attended, if I let them push me through that event, I would never escape. The momentum would carry me forward into a marriage I didn't want, a life that would slowly kill everything real inside me. I would leave with or without enough money, with or without a solid plan, because staying was no longer an option. The engagement party arrived like an execution date I'd been dreading, held at our family estate with over 200 guests from the highest echelons of society. My mother had spared no expense, transforming our already impressive home into something out of a fairy tale, though it felt more like a nightmare to me. White roses covered every surface, crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and a live orchestra played classical music that drifted across the manicured lawns. I wore the dress my mother had chosen, a designer gown that cost more than most people make in 6 months, and stood next to Bradford as he greeted guests with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. He kept his hand possessively on my waist, tightening his grip whenever I tried to move away, and I smiled until my face hurt, playing the role they'd written for me one last time. During the speeches portion of the evening, my father stood at the microphone looking every inch the successful patriarch, his voice booming across the crowd as he announced the engagement officially. "Vivian and I are absolutely thrilled to unite our families through the love between Bradford and Harper," he declared, raising his champagne glass. "The Ashfords and the Wellingtons together represent the very best of what this country has to offer." The audience applauded enthusiastically, and I felt my stomach turn as I stood there, a silent participant in my own entrapment. Then my sister Sloane approached the microphone, asking sweetly if she could say a few words about her beloved sister, and I should have known right then that something terrible was about to happen. What followed was a calculated, vicious public humiliation disguised as a loving tribute. Sloane had created a slideshow that she projected onto a massive screen, supposedly showing my journey from childhood to this moment. But the photos she'd chosen were all deliberately unflattering, catching me at awkward ages, in embarrassing moments, looking foolish or angry or caught off guard. Her commentary was masterfully backhanded, every sentence designed to undermine me while sounding affectionate to anyone not paying close attention. "Harper was always the difficult one in our family," she said with a laugh that the audience echoed. "She questioned everything, challenged everyone, Never quite fit into the world we tried to give her. But Bradford here, bless him, he's so patient. He sees potential in her that the rest of us have been trying to cultivate for years. The worst part came when Sloane revealed details of my supposed ingratitude and rebellion. She actually told me once that she didn't want this perfect life. Sloane said, her voice dripping with false concern. Can you imagine? All this privilege, this opportunity, and she wanted to throw it away for some misguided idea about saving the world. She made it sound like I was mentally unstable, like I needed Bradford to fix me, to guide me back to sanity and appropriate behavior. The audience murmured sympathetically, and I caught several people looking at me with pity, as if I were some troubled soul who needed saving. My mother nodded along sadly, playing the concerned parent perfectly, while my father stood with his arms crossed, his expression stern and disapproving, reinforcing the narrative that I was the problem child who needed to be managed. When Sloane finally finished her speech, people applauded warmly, and several society women approached my mother to tell her how patient and understanding she was to deal with such a difficult daughter. I stood there, my face burning with humiliation, my hands clenched so tightly that my nails cut into my palms. Bradford leaned close to my ear and whispered harshly, "Smile, you're embarrassing yourself and making us all look bad." That's when something inside me finally broke completely. I excused myself, claiming I needed to use the restroom, and walked slowly through the crowd of people who saw me as either a project to be fixed or entertainment to be whispered about. I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom, closing the door behind me and leaning against it as my whole body shook. My phone buzzed in my small clutch purse, and I pulled it out to see a text from Iris. "Job offer is official. Apartment is available starting Monday. You can move in this weekend if you want. The door is open whenever you're ready." I stood there in that bedroom, surrounded by designer furniture and expensive decorations, all the trappings of a life that had never really been mine. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror, and saw a stranger in a beautiful dress, playing a part in someone else's story. This was the moment of decision, the point of no return. I could go back downstairs, smile through the rest of the party, and let the current carry me into the life they'd planned. Or I could choose myself for the first time in 28 years. I grabbed my backpack from the closet, the one I'd packed secretly over the past few weeks with my essential documents, some practical clothes, my laptop, and the cash I'd saved. I left behind all the designer clothes, the jewelry, the credit cards linked to family accounts, everything that tied me to them. I sat down at my desk and wrote a short note on a piece of stationery, my hand steady despite the fear coursing through me. "I'm choosing my own life. Don't look for me." I left the note on my bed and walked toward the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, I could hear the party still going strong downstairs, music and laughter and the clink of champagne glasses celebrating a future I would not be part of. I walked down the grand staircase with my backpack over my shoulder, and the first person to notice me was my mother. The smile froze on Vivian's face as she took in my casual clothes and the bag, her eyes widening in alarm. "Where are you going?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "The party isn't over." I kept walking toward the front door, and she followed me, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "I'm leaving," I said clearly, loud enough that nearby guests started to turn and watch. "For good." My father appeared instantly, his face darkening with anger as he strode across the room. "You will do no such thing," Richard commanded in the voice he used to intimidate business rivals and subordinate employees. I stopped and turned to face them both, aware that we now had an audience of over 200 people. "I quit," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "The engagement, this family, all of it." The room went completely silent, every conversation stopping as people strained to hear what was happening. That's when my cousin Wesley, who I'd always thought was sympathetic to my situation, spoke up from the crowd. "She's been planning this," he announced loudly. "I saw her meeting with some nonprofit guy in the city weeks ago. She's been scheming behind your backs." I felt the sting of that fourth betrayal as I realized Wesley had been reporting to my parents all along, another spy in the network they'd built around me. Bradford pushed through the crowd and grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt, his charm evaporating to reveal the controlling man underneath. "You're being hysterical," he said loudly, performing for the audience. "You don't mean this. You're just overwhelmed." I jerked my arm away from him, my voice cold and clear. "Don't touch me. I mean every word. This engagement is over." Sloane stepped forward then, delivering her final cruelty with perfect timing. "You're nothing without us," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You'll come crawling back within a week, begging us to take you in. My mother's voice was ice when she spoke, every word precisely calibrated for maximum impact. If you walk out that door, Harper, you are no longer our daughter. Do you understand me? You will be cut off completely. My father stepped closer, his face hard as stone. No money, no family, no name. You'll have nothing. I looked at all of them standing there, at the 200 faces watching this drama unfold like entertainment at a show. I saw my mother's cold calculation, my father's ruthless business mind, my sister's barely concealed glee, Bradford's entitled rage, and my cousin's betrayal. I saw the life they wanted me to live stretching ahead like a prison sentence, and I felt something like relief wash over me. I'd rather have nothing than this, I said clearly. And I turned and walked out the front door while 200 of the most powerful people in Connecticut watched in stunned silence. I took a taxi to the city with my backpack and my phone, which I'd removed from the family plan before leaving. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why a woman in designer clothes was heading into the city with only a backpack and a haunted expression. I had $300 in cash in my pocket and $1,200 in my secret bank account, which was everything I owned in the world. I checked into a cheap motel near the bus station, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and questionable stains on the carpet, and I sat on the lumpy bed and cried from a mixture of relief and terror. I had actually done it. I had walked away from millions of dollars, from security, from the only life I'd ever known, and now I was sitting in a motel room that cost $40 a night wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. The next morning, I met Iris at the nonprofit office, a small space in an old building with outdated furniture, and walls covered in environmental posters and activist art. When Iris mentioned to the others that I was from the Ashford family, Griffin looked surprised, and I held my breath waiting for judgment or pity. Instead, he just smiled and said, I knew you were genuine, that's all that matters. I started my new job immediately as an entry-level coordinator, making barely above minimum wage, which was a shock to someone who'd never had to think about money before. The apartment Iris had found for me was in a neighborhood I'd never visited, a tiny studio on the 4th floor of an old walk-up building with thin walls and ancient plumbing. I spent my first night there on the floor in a sleeping bag because I had no furniture, no dishes, no basic household items that normal people accumulated over years of living independently. Reality hit me hard and fast during those first few days. I went to the grocery store and had to carefully calculate how much I could spend, putting items back on the shelf when the total got too high. I'd never cooked for myself before, having grown up with private chefs and caterers, and my first attempts at making basic meals were disasters. I burned rice, undercooked chicken, and lived on peanut butter sandwiches because they were cheap and required no cooking skills. I learned to use public transportation, standing on crowded subway platforms during rush hour, getting lost, trying to navigate the system. I did my laundry at a laundromat, sitting on a plastic chair for hours because I couldn't afford to leave and come back. Every single aspect of daily life was harder than I'd ever imagined, and I was exhausted all the time, both physically and emotionally. But there was also something unexpected happening alongside the struggle. I felt free in a way I'd never experienced before. No one was monitoring my movements. No one was criticizing my choices. No one was performing for. I could wear whatever I wanted, say whatever I thought, make my own decisions, even if they were mistakes. My first week at the nonprofit was challenging because I was learning everything from scratch, but my coworkers were patient and genuine, treating me as an equal rather than as the Ashford daughter. They didn't care about my last name or my background. They cared about whether I showed up on time, worked hard, and believed in the mission. One weekend, I volunteered at a community garden with some of my new colleagues, getting dirt under my fingernails and sweat on my shirt, and I laughed genuinely for the first time in months. Griffin noticed I was struggling with the basics of budget living, and one evening he showed up at my apartment with a used coffee maker and a bag of groceries. We all start somewhere, he said simply, refusing my embarrassed attempts to explain that I could manage. Let me help. That's what friends do. The word friends hit me hard because I realized I'd never had real friends before, only social connections and strategic alliances. Griffin didn't want anything from me, didn't expect me to be anyone other than who I was. We sat on my floor drinking coffee from mismatched mugs he'd brought, and I felt something had been missing my entire life. Genuine human connection with no ulterior motive. But the nights were the hardest. The silence in my tiny apartment was deafening after a lifetime of household staff and family presence. I would lie awake on my sleeping bag wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I was strong enough to make this work, If my family was right that it'd come crawling back. I checked my old social media accounts one night, which was a mistake. Sloan had posted a long, carefully worded statement about the family tragedy of my mental health breakdown. The comments from our society friends were all variations of pity and concern. "So sad for your family," someone wrote. "Mental health is so important," another added. "Poor Vivian, she must be devastated." They'd crafted a narrative where I was the unstable one, where my walking away was evidence of psychological problems rather than strength. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell the truth, but I realized their opinion didn't matter anymore. 3 weeks after I left, the fifth attack came from a distance. I went to the ATM to withdraw some money from my secret account, and the machine rejected my card. I tried again, thinking it was a technical error, but got the same result. I called the bank from a payphone and was told that the account had been frozen due to legal action from Richard Ashford, who'd used his connections to discover the account and block my access to it. Just like that, I lost the $1,200 I'd worked so hard to save. I had $87 left to my name, and my next paycheck wasn't for 2 weeks. I had to borrow money from Iris for groceries, which made me feel humiliated and pathetic. But she hugged me and told me that asking for help was strength, not weakness. Griffin helped me find a weekend gig waitressing at a small cafe in my neighborhood, which meant I was working 7 days a week, but I needed the money desperately. I was exhausted all the time. My feet hurt from standing so many hours. My hands were dry and cracked from constant dishwashing, and I fell into bed each night too tired to even think. But I was surviving, barely, desperately, sometimes just by the skin of my teeth, but I was surviving on my own terms. No one was controlling me. No one was using me as a bargaining chip. No one was treating me like property. The freedom was worth every struggle. Even when I wasn't sure I'd make it through the month. Exactly 24 hours after I walked out of my parents' house, I was sitting at the nonprofit office working on a grant application when my phone started buzzing incessantly. The first call was from my mother, and I ignored it reflexively. Then my father called. Then Sloan again. Within 30 minutes, I had 17 missed calls, and my voicemail was full. At first, I deleted the messages without listening, assuming this was another manipulation tactic to guilt me into coming back. But the calls kept coming with an intensity that felt different from their usual tactics. The tone of the text messages shifted dramatically. The first ones were cold and commanding. "You need to come home immediately. This is not optional." But then they changed. "Please call us back. It's urgent. We need to talk to you about something important." Sloane's texts became increasingly frantic. "Harper, I'm serious. Something happened. Call me now." My mother left a voicemail where her voice was actually shaking, which I'd never heard before in my entire life. "Harper, please, we need you. It's about the family. Please call us back." I stared at my phone, completely confused about what could possibly have happened to make them this desperate after cutting me off so completely. Griffin noticed my distraction and asked if I was okay, and I explained briefly about the flood of calls. "Could be a trap to get you back," he said cautiously. Iris agreed, warning me that manipulative people don't change overnight, that this could be another scheme to reassert control. But the calls kept coming, and there was something in their desperation that didn't feel like their usual calculated manipulation. Finally, I listened to my father's most recent voicemail. His voice, usually so commanding and authoritative, sounded broken in a way that made my hands shake. "Harper, I know you hate us, and you have every right to. But please, we've made a terrible mistake. Everything is falling apart. I'm begging you to call back." Richard Ashford did not beg. Ever. This was completely unprecedented, so far outside his character that I couldn't process it. Against my better judgment and the advice of my friends, I decided to text Sloan because Shed seemed the most panicked. "What happened?" I typed, my thumb hovering over the send button before I finally pressed it. Her response came within seconds. "Call me. Can't explain in text. Please, Harper." I stepped outside the office into the cool afternoon air and called her, my heart pounding. Sloan answered on the first ring, and I could hear genuine panic in her voice, not the fake emotion she usually performed so well. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "Harper, it's bad. Really bad." I kept my voice cold and suspicious. "What are you talking about? You disowned me yesterday." Sloane's words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. "Bradford's family discovered something about Dad. The business deal he was counting on, the whole merger thing, it's completely collapsed. But it's worse than that. Bradford's father had investigators look into Dad's firm, and they found evidence, real evidence of financial fraud, embezzlement, illegal dealings going back years. My stomach dropped as she continued. Bradford's family is threatening to expose everything to the SEC and the media, unless the engagement proceeds exactly as planned. They see you leaving as a breach of the agreement, and they're using it as leverage. Harper, Dad could face criminal charges. Like serious federal prison time. All our assets could be frozen. Mom is having full-blown panic attacks. Our entire social standing is about to be destroyed. I felt dizzy, gripping the brick wall beside me for support. So you want me to sacrifice my life to save Dad from prison for crimes he actually committed? I asked, my voice sharp. Sloane started crying, and for once, it sounded real. I know how it sounds. I know we treated you terribly. But Harper, we're family. We need you. You're the only one who can fix this. The old guilt tried to rise up in my chest, that deeply ingrained sense of family obligation. You disowned me 24 hours ago, I reminded her. Mom said I was no longer her daughter. Sloane's voice broke. I was wrong. We were all wrong. I'm sorry. Please, Mom and Dad are completely falling apart. Everything is collapsing. Just think about it. Please. I hung up and stood there in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just heard. Iris and Griffin had followed me outside and waited for me to explain. When I told them everything, Iris looked furious. This is insane. They want you to marry a creep to save your criminal father from facing consequences for his own actions. Griffin shook his head. You don't owe them anything, Harper. Not after what they did to you. But my mind was racing through all the implications. Part of me felt vindicated, almost triumphant. They needed me now. They were desperate and panicking, and I held all the power. But another part, the part that had been trained since childhood to put family first, felt crushing guilt. Before I could fully process, another call came in, this time from Bradford himself. I almost didn't answer, but something made me curious about what he would say. His voice was cold and calculated, completely lacking the panic that had been in my family's calls. Hello, Harper. I assume you've heard about our little situation. I kept my voice steady. What do you want, Bradford? He laughed. This horrible, entitled sound. Simple. Come back. Marry me as planned. Play the perfect wife. In exchange, my family doesn't destroy yours. And if I refuse? I asked. Bradford's voice turned colder. Your father goes to federal prison. Your mother becomes a complete social pariah. Your precious sister loses everything she's ever known. All because you're too selfish to do the right thing. I felt anger rising in my chest. My father committed crimes. He should face consequences. Bradford scoffed. Perhaps. But can you live with being the one who could have prevented it? Who chose her own happiness over her family's survival? That's a heavy burden, Harper. I wonder if you're strong enough to carry it. He was manipulating me expertly, pushing every button that had been installed during my childhood. You have 12 hours to decide, he continued. After that, I make one phone call, and your family's ruin becomes very, very public. Their names will be dragged through every newspaper and news channel in the country. Think about it. He hung up, and I stood there feeling the weight of an impossible choice crushing down on me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I paced my tiny studio apartment until dawn, my mind spinning through endless scenarios and calculations. The old programming from my childhood kept whispering that family comes first, that loyalty and duty matter more than personal happiness, that I was being selfish for even considering letting them face the consequences of their own actions. The guilt consumed me in waves. If my father went to prison, it would be because I refused to help. If my mother's reputation was destroyed, I could have prevented it. If Sloane lost everything, it was my fault for walking away. By the time the sun came up, I was on the verge of calling Bradford to accept his ultimatum, convinced that I had no choice but to sacrifice myself again. Griffin texted me early in the morning asking if I wanted to meet for coffee before work, probably sensing that I was in crisis. I met him at the small cafe where I'd been working weekends, and I must have looked terrible because his expression immediately filled with concern. I broke down completely, telling him everything about the ultimatum and the 12-hour deadline that was rapidly approaching. Griffin listened carefully, his steady presence somehow grounding me when I felt like I was spinning apart. When I finished explaining, he asked quietly, "What does your gut tell you?" I answered automatically, that I should save them. They're my family. He nodded slowly, then asked, And what does your heart tell you? I paused, really considering the question for the first time. That this is another trap, I admitted. Another way to control me, to pull me back into that world. Griffin reached across the table and took my hand. Harper, I barely know you, but I've watched you over these past few weeks. You've been happier in 2 weeks of struggling to survive than most people ever get to be in their entire lives. Don't throw that away. His words hit me hard, cutting through the fog of guilt and obligation. But if I don't go back, I said, my voice breaking, my father could go to prison. Griffin's voice was gentle but firm. For crimes he committed. That's not on you. That's on him. You're not responsible for saving him from the consequences of his own criminal actions. That shift in perspective felt like a door opening in my mind. I went to work but couldn't focus on anything, my thoughts constantly circling back to the deadline ticking closer. During my lunch break, I pulled out my laptop and started researching my father's firm online, something I'd never done before. What I found made me feel physically sick. There were news articles about investor complaints, regulatory investigations that had been quietly settled, whispers of impropriety that had been buried by expensive lawyers and well-placed connections. I found message boards where people talked about losing money to Richard Ashford's schemes, testimonies from victims whose lives had been destroyed by his greed. One woman's testimony in particular struck me like a physical blow. I lost my entire life savings because Richard Ashford lied to me about the stability of investments he knew were failing. I trusted him because of his reputation, and now I'm 65 years old with no retirement and no way to recover. I worked my whole life, and he took it all. I sat there reading story after story of real people, families who had been bankrupted, elderly investors who'd lost everything, young couples whose dreams had been destroyed. My father wasn't just a flawed man who'd made some mistakes. He was a criminal who had deliberately hurt innocent people for his own profit, and had felt no remorse because people like that woman didn't matter to him. The sixth attack came through email, while I was still processing what I'd learned. My mother had sent a long message with the subject line, "Please read this." The email was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Harper, I'm your mother. I'm begging you as the woman who gave you life. If you ever loved us, if you have any loyalty left, come home. We have 8 hours left before everything is destroyed. Please don't destroy this family. Please don't abandon us when we need you most. Shed included photos in the email. Pictures of Vivian looking distraught and aged. Photos of our mansion. Old family pictures from happier times. Every image was carefully chosen to trigger my guilt and nostalgia. I stared at those photos for a long time, feeling the emotional pull. Then I noticed something in one of the more recent pictures. In the background, behind where my mother was supposedly devastated, Sloane was on her phone, and she was smiling. Not just smiling, but looking pleased in a way that didn't match the supposed crisis. I zoomed in on the image and studied it carefully. Sloane looked excited, almost triumphant, completely at odds with the panic Shed expressed on the phone. Something felt very wrong about that discrepancy. A terrible suspicion began forming in my mind, and I decided to do something I probably shouldn't have. I called my cousin Wesley, the one who had betrayed me at the engagement party. Wesley answered cautiously. Harper? Oh, thank God you called. Are you coming back? I kept my voice neutral. Tell me the truth, Wesley. How bad is it really? He hesitated, and I could hear the conflict in his silence. It's complicated, he finally said. I pushed harder. I deserve the truth. You owe me that much after spying on me. Wesley sighed deeply. Your dad is definitely in trouble. The criminal stuff is real. But Sloane is playing this up way more than it needs to be. She's actually excited about the whole situation. My blood ran cold. Excited? Why would she be excited? Wesley's voice dropped to almost a whisper. If you come back and marry Bradford, your parents promise Sloane your entire inheritance. Everything. She gets it all if you're married off and out of the family business. The fourth betrayal fully revealed itself in that moment, and I felt rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. She orchestrated this, I said, the pieces falling into place. Wesley confirmed it. She's been planning it for months. She encouraged your parents to push the Bradford match. She's the one who fed information about your dad's illegal activities to Bradford's family. She created this whole crisis specifically to trap you. I'm sorry I helped her. She paid me to spy on you, and I thought it was harmless family politics. But this is too far. Harper, I can't keep quiet anymore. I hung up, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Everything clicked into horrible clarity. This was never about family unity or saving my father from ruin. This was about control, money, and eliminating me from the family wealth. Sloan wanted me gone or trapped in a marriage where I'd be isolated and powerless, unable to claim any part of the Ashford fortune. Richard's crimes were real, but the manufactured urgency, the 12-hour deadline, the emotional manipulation, it was all theater designed to back me into a corner. Bradford was in on it too, getting obedient wife, while Sloan got the inheritance, and my parents maintained their social appearances. I had been played from the very beginning, manipulated by people who saw me as an obstacle to be removed rather than a person to be loved. I had 6 hours left before Bradford's deadline, but now I knew the full truth, and I was done being the victim in their schemes. I wasn't the helpless, guilt-ridden daughter anymore. I was someone who'd survived 2 weeks on her own, who'd learned she was stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and I was about to prove just how much power I actually had. I called Iris immediately and asked if she could connect me with any lawyer friends from law school, specifically someone who specialized in corporate fraud and criminal law. She made a call, and within an hour, I was sitting across from Meredith Chen, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who listened to my entire story with an expression of growing interest. When I finished explaining everything, Meredith leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. "Your father's crimes are serious," she said bluntly. "He's likely going to face consequences regardless of what you do. But blackmail is also illegal. And if you have proof that Bradford's family is explicitly threatening to expose crimes in exchange for forcing you into marriage, that's a federal offense." I felt a spark of hope. "What if I have proof?" I asked. Meredith sat forward. "What kind of proof?" I pulled out my phone and explained that I had an app installed that automatically recorded all my calls for note-taking purposes, something I'd forgotten about until that moment. I found the recording of Bradford's call and played it for Meredith. Bradford's voice filled the small office, cold and threatening. "Come back. Marry me as planned. Play the perfect wife. In exchange, my family doesn't destroy yours. Your father goes to federal prison. Your mother becomes a complete social pariah. Your precious sister loses everything. All because you're too selfish to do the right thing." Meredith actually smiled, a fierce expression that told me she knew exactly what she was hearing. "This is gold," she said. "Bradford Wellington III just confessed to extortion and blackmail on a recorded line. His family can't expose your father without incriminating themselves in a federal crime." I felt power flowing back into my body. Strength I didn't know I possessed. Meredith and I spent the next hour crafting a strategy. She explained that while my father would still likely face legal consequences, Bradford's leverage was completely gone the moment he made those threats. We prepared a response that would flip the entire situation. 2 hours before Bradford's deadline, I called him from Meredith's office with her listening on speaker. Bradford answered on the first ring, his voice smug and confident. "I knew you'd see reason eventually," he said. "Smart choice, Harper." I took a deep breath and said clearly, "I'm not coming back, Bradford." There was a pause, then his voice turned dangerous. "Then your family is finished. I'll make the call right now." "Actually, Bradford," I said, and Meredith gave me an encouraging nod. "We need to talk about your blackmail scheme." I played him a portion of his own recorded threat. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "That's a federal crime," I continued. "I've already given copies of this recording to my attorney. You're listening to her right now, actually." Bradford's voice turned ice cold. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't destroy your own family." I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Try me. Make your call to expose my father. I'll make mine to the FBI about your extortion. Let's see whose family comes out worse." Another long pause. Bradford was calculating, trying to figure out if I was serious. "What do you want?" he finally asked. And I could hear that he knew he'd lost. "You and your family leave mine alone," I said firmly. "You drop whatever information you have about my father. What he did will come out eventually through proper legal channels, but not from you, not as blackmail." Bradford's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "And why would I agree to this?" I smiled even though he couldn't see me. "Because if you don't, I go public with this recording. Your family's reputation for blackmail and extortion will be worse than anything my father did. Every business deal you've ever made will be scrutinized. Every relationship will be questioned. Your name will be mud." Bradford was trapped and he knew it. Through gritted teeth he agreed. Fine. But don't ever contact me or my family again. He hung up abruptly, and I sat back in my chair, adrenaline pumping through my entire body. I'd done it. I'd actually stood up to them and won. Meredith was grinning. That was impressive. Most people would have caved. I thanked her profusely, and she refused to take any payment, saying that watching me stand up to those people was payment enough. I left her office feeling like I was walking on air, like I'd shed a weight I'd been carrying my entire life. I called my parents' house, and my mother answered immediately, her voice tense and hopeful. Harper, are you coming? Her assumption that I'd cave, that I'd sacrifice myself, made me angry all over again. No, Mother, I'm not coming back, Vivian's voice rose. But Bradford will expose everything, and hell destroy us. I cut her off. Bradford won't do anything. I took care of it. There was confused silence. What did you do? She asked. I explained calmly that I'd stopped letting people manipulate me, that I'd found a way to remove Bradford's leverage. Dad's crimes will catch up to him eventually, but not because I was too weak to stand up for myself. My mother's voice immediately turned sharp and cold, the fake concern evaporating. You selfish girl. After everything we've done for you, all the opportunities we've given you, this is how you repay us. I felt strangely calm in the face of her anger. Everything you've done? You mean controlling me, using me as a bargaining chip, trying to sell me off to save yourselves? I know about Sloane's plan to take my inheritance, Mother. Wesley told me everything. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. She didn't deny it. You were all willing to trap me in a loveless marriage just for money and social status. I continued. My mother's voice went cold. You don't understand how the world works, Harper. You never have. I understand perfectly, I said, and I want absolutely nothing to do with it. Vivian's final words were delivered with vicious precision. Fine. Don't come crawling back when your little poverty experiment fails. You'll be begging us for help within a month. I felt nothing but relief. I won't, I said simply, and hung up. Within seconds, my phone rang again. Sloane. I answered, curious to hear what she'd say, now that her scheme had fallen apart. Harper, what did you do? She demanded. Her voice panicked. Bradford is furious. Hess backing out of everything. The whole deal is off. I smiled. Good. Sloane's voice rose to a shriek. You ruined it. This was supposed to be perfect. I was supposed to finally get what I deserved. You mean you were supposed to steal my inheritance while I was stuck in a loveless marriage? I asked calmly. I know, Sloane. Wesley told me everything. She sputtered for a moment, then recovered with impressive speed. You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine. I felt nothing but pity for her. I don't need to prove anything. I'm done with all of you. Sloane's voice turned vicious in a way I'd heard many times before. You'll regret this. You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back, and we won't take you in. You'll end up homeless and alone. I took a deep breath and said calmly, I'd rather be nothing than be you, Sloane. I hung up and immediately blocked all their numbers. Every single contact that tied me to that family. Griffin had been texting me asking how everything went, and I responded simply, I'm free. He sent back a string of celebratory emojis and asked if I wanted to get dinner to celebrate. I met him and Iris at a small restaurant near my apartment. Nothing fancy, just good food and genuine company. I told them everything that had happened, and they listened with amazement and pride. You were incredible, Iris said, raising her glass of cheap wine. You beat them at their own game. Griffin smiled at me across the table. How does it feel? I thought about it for a moment. It feels like I can breathe for the first time in my life, I said honestly. We stayed there for hours, laughing and talking, and I realized this was what real friendship felt like. No performance, no agenda, just people who cared about each other. 3 months passed, and my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I first walked out of my parents' mansion, with nothing but a backpack. I was still living in my small studio apartment, but it no longer felt like a prison or a punishment. I'd made it into a real home with plants on the windowsill, secondhand furniture I'd found at thrift stores and fixed up myself, and photos of real friends covering the walls. My job at the nonprofit had grown beyond the entry-level position I'd started with. I was now managing a major environmental campaign, using my Yale business education for something that actually mattered, creating real change, instead of just accumulating wealth. The work was hard and the pay was still modest, but I woke up every morning with purpose instead of dread. My relationship with Griffin had developed slowly and naturally into something genuine and beautiful. He didn't try to fix me or control me or mold me into someone I wasn't. He supported my growth, celebrated my victories, and stood beside me during struggles. We'd spent weekends hiking in state parks, volunteering at community gardens, attending free concerts in the city. All things that cost little money but brought real joy. I'd learned what it felt like to be valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide or represent. Iris had become like a sister to me, the kind of sister who actually supported and encouraged, rather than undermined and betrayed. I volunteered weekly at the community garden we'd discovered together, getting my hands dirty and connecting with people from all walks of life. Financially, I was stable in a way I'd never been before, even when I had access to millions. I'd learned to budget carefully, to appreciate what I had, to find creative solutions instead of throwing money at problems. I understood the value of $1 now, the real cost of things, and I'd discovered that I could survive and even thrive on far less than I'd ever imagined. The news broke one Tuesday morning while I was at work. Richard Ashford arrested for fraud. The federal investigation had caught up with him completely independently of anything Bradford's family had done. I read the article on my phone while sitting at my desk, Griffin beside me with a supportive hand on my shoulder. The charges were extensive: securities fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering. The article estimated he'd stolen over $40 million from investors over a decade. "You okay?" Griffin asked gently. I considered the question carefully. "Yeah," I said honestly. "I'm sad, but I don't feel guilty." He made his choices. The investigation revealed everything in brutal detail over the following weeks. The news covered it extensively because the Ashford name had been so prominent in Connecticut society. I watched my mother on the news, perfectly made up and dressed, playing the shocked wife who had no idea what her husband had been doing. "We're victims too," she told reporters tearfully. "We had no idea. We're devastated by his betrayal." Sloane did an interview with a local news station, portraying herself as the innocent daughter whose family had been torn apart. "Our family is devastated," she said, dabbing at dry eyes. "We never imagined our father could do something like this." I watched these performances with a strange detachment. They were still lying, still manipulating, still playing victims when they'd known and benefited from Richard's crimes for years. But their lies weren't my problem anymore. I wasn't involved, wasn't responsible, wasn't tied to their choices. That freedom was worth everything I'd given up. One afternoon, a letter arrived at my apartment, forwarded from an old address. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. I hesitated for a long time before opening it, my hands shaking slightly. The letter was short and to the point. "Harper, your father is in prison awaiting trial. Our assets have been frozen pending the investigation. Sloane and I are struggling financially. We were wrong to treat you the way we did. Please come home. We need your help. We need you." I read the letter twice, looking for any hint of genuine remorse or understanding, but it was the same manipulation with a different crisis. They still didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource to be tapped when convenient. I sat down at my small desk and wrote a short response on plain paper. "I hope you find your way forward. I've found mine. I didn't send money. I didn't offer to visit. I simply mailed the note and closed that chapter of my life." The healing process had been ongoing through therapy I'd started a month after leaving. My therapist helped me work through years of emotional abuse and manipulation, helping me understand the difference between conditional and unconditional love, teaching me about healthy boundaries and self-worth. In therapy, I learned that my family's love had always been conditional on my obedience, on my willingness to sacrifice myself for their goals. Real love, the kind I'd found with Griffin and Iris and my community of friends, was unconditional. They loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. They supported my growth rather than trying to control it. They celebrated my independence rather than punishing it. 6 months after leaving my family, I was invited to speak at a women's empowerment event about my experience walking away from wealth and control. I was terrified standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces. But I told my story honestly. I talked about the gilded cage of privilege, the cost of conditional love, the courage it took to choose freedom over comfort. The audience response was overwhelming. Women approached me afterward with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of control and escape, of families who didn't understand them, of the struggle to choose themselves. One young woman in her early 20s grabbed my hands and said, "I'm in a similar situation. My family wants me to marry someone I don't love for business reasons. How did you find the courage to walk away?" I looked at her frightened, hopeful face, and said honestly, I realized that being uncomfortable in freedom was better than being comfortable in a cage. The discomfort of struggle is temporary, but the regret of not trying lasts forever. She started crying and hugged me tightly. Thank you, she whispered. I needed to hear that so badly. In that moment, I understood that my pain had purpose. My story could help others find their own courage. The struggle had meaning beyond just my own liberation. The final scene of my new life played out on an ordinary Tuesday evening in my small apartment. Griffin was there, helping me cook dinner in my tiny kitchen. Iris stopped by with Chinese takeout because my cooking experiment had failed spectacularly, and we all laughed about my inability to make anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. We sat on my floor eating from containers, talking about our day, making plans for a weekend hike. My phone sat silent on the counter. No missed calls from my family, no guilt trips or manipulation, no demands or expectations. Just peace. I looked around at the life Eid built from nothing, and I felt something Eid never experienced in the mansion. Contentment. Not the performance of happiness for an audience, but real, genuine peace with who I was and the choices I'd made. People often asked me if I regretted leaving, if I missed the money and the status and the security of my old life. The answer was always simple and honest. Not for a single second. I'd learned that blood doesn't make a family. Love, respect, and genuine support make a family. I'd learned that money and status mean absolutely nothing if you have to lose yourself to maintain them. I'd learned that the hardest prison to escape is the one built by people who claim to love you while systematically destroying who you really are. My parents disowned me, and my sister mocked me, and 24 hours later, their panic calls tried to trap me all over again with a different kind of cage. But this time, I didn't answer their demands. I found my own solution, took control of my own story, and refused to be the victim they needed me to be. And that choice, that single decision to value my freedom over their approval, made all the difference. Freedom isn't about having everything, or living without struggle. Freedom is about being free to choose what truly matters, to define success on your own terms, to live authentically even when it's hard. I finally had that freedom, and I would never give it up again. I was surrounded by real love, doing meaningful work, living a life that reflected my values. I was exactly where I needed to be. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between what your family expected and what your heart needed? Have you ever felt trapped by people who claim to love you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about finding courage and choosing yourself. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to walk away from toxicity, even when it's family. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. I hope it gave you strength or perspective, or just reminded you that you're not alone in your struggles. Remember, you deserve to be free, to be valued, to be loved for who you really are. Never settle for less. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.